Go, sponsored by our friends at, so, okay, they're going to get set up here. So as I alluded to before, now the headline of this panel is viral video secret sauce. So you're going to hear it here first. Our moderator is, Craig, I should have asked you how to say your, is it Batzofin? I kind of wanted to go with the French Craig Batzofin, but I guess I won't. And your title is Director of Earned Media? I don't think I've heard of that title before. I mean, you would think that we would have, but are you the first Director of Earned Media ever in the universe?
Not in the world. At EVB, I am.
Okay, so he's with EVB.
First generation, probably.
He's the best one, though.
Right. Oh, he is. Yeah. No, we knew that. Okay. So, and he's with Evolution Bureau, which is also EVB, and they will introduce themselves. So, give them. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for everyone for sticking around from this morning. And for those just arriving, we are the opening act before the cocktail hour. So after what must have been a long day focused on discussion around social and metrics, I think having this panel at the end of the day was probably a wise move because everyone here watches video, and it doesn't take an excessive amount of brain power to kind of figure out what you like, what you want to post to your own wall. But what I think that, however, what most of us here realize, but almost none of the audience realizes, is that so much of the branded content that's being consumed today is the product of literally thousands and thousands of man-hours spent by brand managers, creative agencies, distribution companies, planning, producing, and distributing this content. So today I want to take some time to talk about what we as an industry are doing to make that effort more sustainable, more efficient, more effective, and more creative as well. Before we dive in, I'll just briefly tell you about ourselves. As Kathy said, I'm Craig Batzofin. I'm the EP and Director for Media at Evolution Bureau. We're about 50 strong here in the city. EVB is probably best known for its work on Elf Yourself, circa 2006. More recently, you've probably seen some of our work for Skittles Mob the Rainbow on Facebook, Juicy Fruit Serenading Unicorn, Altoids Curiously Strong Awards. We don't only work on gum. We're also the architects of Facebook Studio, which just hit 200,000 fans. And we're also happy to be working on several Clorox brands. I started at EVB in 2009 after almost 2 years at Droga5 in New York City, where I produced The Great Schlep, the Million Incentive Program for the New York Department of Education. And I was also fortunate enough to work on a couple of viral videos for Net 10 and Activision, Guitar Hero, which were both fairly successful. So panel, please go down the line, introduce yourself, tell us who you work for, and a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Brian Betker from the Buddy Group. I'm Chief Creative Officer and one of the partners there. We are a digital engagement agency based down in Orange County. We have a focus on video. We have 2 sound stages within our agency and create things like interactive video games on YouTube for Mattel, product videos for Epson. We just worked with Google and American Express to launch My Business Story on YouTube. So a variety of different types of video engagements online.
I'm Greg Ehrlich. I am at Clorox and have the pleasure of working with Craig and EVB. I was just explaining to the panel when we were talking downstairs that every time I say I work at Clorox, I have to say it's not just Clorox, the Clorox Bleach Company, but in fact is a holding company with a bunch of brands under it, and we do a surprising amount of digital work there that I am excited to be a part of.
Dan Greenberg, co-founder of a company called ShareThrough, a San Francisco-based company, about a 50-person company. One of the first companies, as is June Group on my left over here, and Viewable Media in the back over there, dedicated specifically to brand video content distribution. I think it's super interesting that we finally gotten to a point in the market that we actually have representation up here without any of the traditional video ad networks, which is really cool to see. We've sort of hit this inflection point where it's all about content, and there's a couple technology companies focused on that. ShareThrough is one of them, and there's some OGs of viral video in this room here.
Walter Haas.
This being one of them.
Yeah, thank you. No, Walter Haas. I work at Levi's in the digital platforms group, and some of the work we did with viral film was about creating a platform to do as much as we can with it to really, take off brand handcuffs and see what results we'd get from it from a real test point of view. So the two that came out of that was one called Guy Walks Across America, which was a stop motion sort of spectacular made by some great young pioneering filmmakers down in Los Angeles. The second one was called Rear View Girls, originally called Ass Cam, which, as the title more accurately describes, is about these young women who really got tired of people checking them out, so they decided to put a hidden camera on the back of their Levi's Curve ID jeans and, really call people out on the streets of Los Angeles. And, really what we, been talking about beforehand downstairs was just sort of about how much corporate culture, really can help and can enable and also can get in the way of producing really high impactful work and highly efficient work. So love to talk about what we did.
I'm Mitchell Reika, and as Dan said, I run a company called June Group. We call ourselves a social video platform, and what we do is distribute millions of video views, all of which are opt-in for a number of big brands, across social networks, across mobile devices of every description, premium content networks, and on YouTube.
Great. Thanks, Mitchell. So let's get started. We'll talk about for maybe half an hour and then open it up for questions. Just starting kind of broadly, and this is a question that you've probably been asked before, but I'll ask it anyway just to kind of kick it off. And really this is for the whole panel. Do you guys believe there's a formula for creating viral success, or is it a combination of great creative luck and timing? Anyone can step forward. Yeah.
I'd say it's great creative luck, timing, and a lot of media strategy. I think it's really hard to create a viral campaign, especially if it's a brand campaign, if there's not a solid media strategy behind it. There's a lot of viral videos that have nothing to do with brands that go viral and don't need media, and media wouldn't be relevant. Charlie bit my finger, that kind of stuff. But if you're talking about a Levi's campaign, if you're talking about a Fox campaign or Nike or Nestle or anything like that, I think what's exciting is that there's finally an opportunity to spend media dollars distributing viral content. So that's the model, I think, is the four things you just said: luck, timing, creative, and maybe a little PR and media.
Do you think that was always the case, or is it more the case now that there's just so much clutter in the marketplace, brands just distributing video so aggressively? So then, say 5 years ago, when the industry was much less mature.
I think that the way you formulate your question about viral video, I think can be done without media. I do agree. If you stick in the word brand, then you probably need some help, because I think of the top 20 most viewed videos of all time on the whole internet in total, none of them were brand videos. They were all things like Lady Gaga, which got over 1 billion, and all the others, which were, I think 18 out of 20 were music videos. I think it's a lot harder when you're trying to sell something to do it organically, and I think some of the ones that have had huge hits, like the Darth Vader, little Darth thing, was accidental, from my understanding. It wasn't launched as a viral video, it was launched as a TV campaign during Super Bowl, and it took off. So I think it's a combination of doing everything right and probably having all things firing at the same time.
We asked ourselves that same question and looked at 50 videos of the most successful videos, some brands, some not, and tried to deconstruct it. Like, not to say what can you do to make sure it goes viral, but what's the propensity that it might go viral?
Right, what are the common attributes amongst all those videos?
Right, exactly. So did this thing, it's viral barometer, like create a little calculator, you can go and do these different attributes and whatnot to see, like, if it has musicality. We found musicality has a huge factor of increasing the likelihood of it going viral. It has to be authentic. I think that's one of the big things to your question about, is the video marketplace totally glutted? It is, but so much of it's inauthentic. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to have an authentic video, that's going to automatically elevate it amongst the fray.
Right, interesting. Along those same lines, do you guys think there's a difference in the ideation process for viral videos versus, say, conventional TVCs?
There shouldn't be. I think that creating any great media event requires, as everybody indicated here, a lot of strategy, a lot of budget, and great creative smarts. So there's no secret sauce to this. I would argue that very little luck is involved in these things. Sure, you have the odd thing that a father shot in the back of a car that, quote unquote, goes viral, but if you look at all those top viral videos, you'll find a mass media component to every single one of them. A Boing Boing has to pick it up, or a television station, or something else. This is not just peer-to-peer, a friend sharing it with a friend. So we're all talking about brands here. If you're going to do good work in any medium, you have to have a killer strategy, very talented creative people, and you have to have a budget. Now, this is probably one of the places where a guy like Walter could do a low-budget thing and have great success with it, but I would imagine that the people that are coming up with that most times are well-paid, and there's a lot of thought that goes behind it.
Yeah, but I think you can create the condition. I think it really does start with the creative, and it's something we all talk about, we all know. But very few times will brands create the right conditions to really empower their creative to actually make really highly impactful work that is authentic, that will have all these attributes. And I think that is something that a brand you can control. You can also control the strategy too, and that just really involves being clued in and being really on top of it. But I think the ways that you can control the creative process is to let the creative people do their job and you to do your job. And I think the way in which, and we were talking about this earlier, that most brands sort of guide creative is basically to try and do half their job for them. And it fails every time, honestly. It's the extremely complex briefs that are highly, highly contradictory. It's the, it's being a little bit unclear what you want out of the campaign, or saying you want all these things out of a campaign when you're lucky to get one. When in reality, that's the, you need to be able to give really clear, a really clear sort of nirvana to your creative agency, and then have them come back to you with more ideas than you may be comfortable with, as opposed to one idea that checks every box you've asked for. Maybe come back with a few ideas, and together you to look at, what in our gut would actually have the chance of going viral? What in our gut would actually be something that I would want to watch if I didn't work at Levi's, if I didn't work at Clorox? And I feel like those are the questions that are never asked, because it's so much is front-ended on the briefing process, when in reality the briefing process should be very linear and very straightforward.
But you said that there's a couple challenges. One, the challenge that you just said is the brand has to do their job and really have a clear brief and give great direction to their agency. But then you have multiple agencies that don't play nice together. So even if the brand does its job well and even hires great people, there's still challenges beyond that, right?
You're talking about the creative agency, the media agency, the PR agency, and then
the social agency,
the distribution agency. Yeah.
Yeah, a mantra I like to say a lot to people when they talk about viral is that viral is an outcome, it's not a strategy. So I think everyone kind of knows that, but sometimes people don't kind of remember that when they say, let's do a viral video. But I do think there are things like, you want to be in the top slot on YouTube in the first 24 hours, and the things that, there are best practices certainly to maximize what you've got. But for sure, if I were to allow your comment that luck has nothing to do with it, or very little to do with it.
The least to do with it.
Yeah, I do think there's a component that is maybe a miracle when it does work, given that there's a lot of pieces that have to come together just right.
One thing that you had said also about all videos are somewhat put together the same way, there's a lot of commonalities.
I said the one common thing is that a mass medium plays a role at some point.
Right.
Because I think there are 50 different ways to have success. I'll say that.
Right,
and not one is any better than the other.
Mm-hmm. And I think one big difference between viral and, say, a product video, though, is that a successful product video can still be made with decision by committee. As painful as it is, it can still be made and successful decision by committee. If you're trying to do a viral video and you're set up with decision by committee, you're screwed. Like, there's absolutely no chance of it being successful. Like, the fewer number of people involved, probably the better.
Yeah, and that's always true. And then you're having to deal with the reality of being at a large brand when that's hard. So I think the way, the workaround there is to really think of it as, again, teams, not committees, where you're activating the relevant function within your organization when they need to show up, making sure that they, are aware, and so you can, quell individual concerns. But ultimately, you don't need legal in the room during the creative ideation process. That should be one person from the brand who's empowered enough to say yes or no.
Yeah, I would just echo one truth, which I was just thinking of one outlier which doesn't fit any of this rule, but does fit your observation, is Will It Blend, which you guys are probably all familiar with, and it's got this guy who seems a little bewildered that he's getting these emails asking to put an iPhone in his blender, but it's basically just a product demo video. And I think it's sort of a manifestation of the process you're talking about, that I don't think he set out or even understands his success, because he's in a way like his own creative, because he's the guy, I think he's actually the guy who created Will It Blend, the blender. And he's sort of a victim of his success, because people write him emails like, put a thing in your blender and it blended. So I do think there's a component to not necessarily having the predicted outcome.
I think we can kind of extend the definition of viral video too. I mean, I think a lot of people up here have kind of said that viral video is a once in a lifetime miracle. But I think what we're all talking about and why we're all so excited about this market is that it's this departure from traditional TV, and it's not just viral video, this unicorn nirvana that you see once in a lifetime. I mean, question for the room, has anybody in this room ever had success with a viral video, producing or strategizing around it? Has anyone produced content or been part of a team that produced content that wasn't a TV ad?
Yeah. I mean, what are you defining as viral, though?
What's that?
What is viral, though? Like when you say, has anyone produced a viral video, what's viral?
The way I define viral is like full cultural phenomenon taking over the moment in time. True viral. But I think what's exciting is the spectrum between TV and what sounds like everybody else in the room has actually produced. It looks like there's 10 people who've been part of things that are not necessarily viral, but fit into this concept of choice and discovery as opposed to just the traditional TV. So I think that's what gets at least me excited, that every once in a while you get that viral miracle, but you're not always searching for it. Sometimes you are searching for a really targeted product demo, and it works in a 3-minute format instead of the 15-second TV spot.
Yeah, because I think for me, viral at the end of the day is the true kind of going back to what a virus is. It spreads, it starts with a host, it spreads, and so there's not, by the definition, a number. Viral isn't 10 million, it's not 20 million. But like for a product video, viral could be 5,000.
Yeah, you can have I think micro viral and macro viral probably.
Yeah, I think that's well observed, because Greg, you are the director of earned media, but I think anytime you do a project well, you're going to get some level of earned media on it, which you could define as like micro viral success. I will just note, I think viral is a very funny term for it, because in no other place in our life do we celebrate viruses taking off. But I think getting some version of earned versus paid is always the objective. I do think that a separate conversation is about what success looks like when you create a video. Because I think everyone wants to have it go where like the odometer spins on YouTube and you get 50 million views in the first 15 minutes.
Which brings me to my next question. Nice. What defines success within your organizations? What metrics are most important to you? And obviously it's very much linked to your objectives setting out, but I think this is a good jumping off point.
Yeah, well, that's proprietary. But I can tell you what was important to us for our project, which was exactly what you guys have said, and it is this sort of classic definition of virality. Here's the thing. I think virality is not impossible to optimize conditions for. You cannot guarantee it. Virality is just really hard to produce as an effect. That's why you see all these articles about viral is dead. Well, yeah, this idea of asking for viral is dead. But I think, to me, I asked specifically for what is it going to take creatively to achieve a cultural phenomenon. And I define that based as something between our budget, it's a little bit of a mixture between how much we are putting into it and how much impact outsized that we're expecting from it, which basically means how much distribution can I get through free media channels, earned media, whatever, and it has to completely outweigh the amount of investing from a media and production point of view. And that to me was outsized success and outside viral success, even within the realm of social video. But again, those are the very much the 1% kind of things that you can hope for.
But speaking to Dan's point, a lot of our clients come to us not because they want some monster viral hit. They come to us with recipe videos or a demonstration, a how-to video, and they're looking for engagement. Very few people, besides Dan and myself, can very consistently drive engagement for a 3 or 4 minute long video and have people actually watch it to the end. So that client is very happy if they come to us for 250,000 views, I think, speaking of what Gregor was saying, and we deliver that plus some earned media and recipe downloads or coupon downloads and visits to websites. Now you're looking at, okay, this is a client that a couple of years ago might have been tempted to try to have some viral phenomenon just to make some impact, but now they're looking at it in more of a micro way, saying, I want to reach moms, I want to do it in a targeted way, and I want to get value for my media dollar. How does this compare to CPM-based pre-roll, which is what I normally do? And then we have these conversations where it's really dollars and cents, and it becomes a lot. This is maybe where you're hearing me talk a lot less about luck, because this is a lot of the work we do. 4 or 5 times a year we'll do a monster viral hit, and it's great fun. refund, and the client pays for 1/8 of what they get. But the rest of the time, our clients are generally very happy when we meet our goals, and they're reaching 70–80% of their target audience during these campaigns.
Yeah, but I mean, and I think that's the sophisticated way to buy media these days, you know, but let's just acknowledge that's buying media, and that's very much in the same model of the way we've been buying media for the last 40 years. You know, it's now we're just doing designer drugs, you know, and that's better, and they fix the problem better, and they do it more efficiently, but it's incremental change, you know, and I feel like when you look at the companies, and Levi's is not included in this, of course, when you look at the Apple of the world, it obviously contravened everything we think about in terms of marketing, where everything they did, quote unquote, went viral, and everything they did primarily relied on PR to drive their story. And there's a lot of factors in there too. And I feel like, you know, obviously as brands, a lot of brands are still in the old school way, and then brands are moving into this, you know, improved upon way, which is a little bit of the old school and a little bit of taking advantage of, you know, the opportunities that the medium exists. And then there's those occasional brands that are just going way beyond that. And it's interesting, and it's extremely rare.
And it depends on the brand, because a brand like your brand or Apple's wants that. A brand like Kraft may not, and they're very happy moving the needle. And yeah, in some ways it's a small incremental change, but if you think about the difference in having people self-select this and share it and so forth, it's actually quite dramatic. And the whole system of for the first time since the 40s, not doing CPM-based blowout reach and frequency stuff, 50% of my budget is a waste, I just don't know which 50%. It's turning, for those guys, it's turning it on its ear.
Hey, Craig, I got an interesting story, actually, about success metrics. Timely and relevant here. This is not really specific to Share Through. I've separately been helping with something for one of our investors, actually, but who here lives in San Francisco? Have you guys seen the Ed Lee, Brian Wilson thing that launched yesterday? Yeah. Some people have? I think that's a perfect example. So again, this is not Share Through. There's no media behind this or anything, but perfect example of where success metrics are a little bit misleading. That video, it's like an Ed Lee, Brian Wilson, fear the mustache. Ed Lee's the mayor of San Francisco, trying to get him reelected. That video got press everywhere you could imagine, from New York Times to Wired to NPR yesterday to KNBR to Talking Points Memo and every other political blog. And we woke up this morning and it had 110,000 views, which on one hand is awesome because there's no paid media behind it. On the other hand, is that a success? Right?
Given all the press coverage.
Maybe actually ask that differently. Is that as much success as you could have gotten from that campaign? I think what's exciting about that is that, like Mitchell just said, this is the first time where if Ed Lee wanted to, he could take this cultural phenomenon that he just created and blow it up by 100. He could put $1 million behind it or $500,000 behind it, and he could take this moment he's created, 100,000 people who love it, and you know, if you guys have seen it, it's pretty awesome, right? It's pretty awesome. You could actually scale it as a media strategy, as opposed to just a crossing your fingers really hard strategy.
This goes to something we were talking about downstairs of the difference between a goal and a metric. You know, like a lot of times when you talk about viral videos, it's all about the metrics. How many views did you get? How long were people on the videos? You know, all these things are like inane, sometimes useless metrics. But if you get down to a goal of what are you trying to accomplish? You know, some brands need to elevate the perception of their brand. And so if you can do that with 10,000 influencers, that's worth way more than creating a video that maybe doesn't elevate the brand but gets out to 500,000 people.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, you all should have been downstairs because it was a way more interesting conversation. But the Ed Lee thing I think is interesting because I was actually going to raise it earlier. I didn't know that you had worked on it, but I think it is interesting to exactly that point, which is even if it got 1 million views today instead of 100,000, it was not. I mean, let's presume it was intentionally done to get Ed Lee elected. Let's say that was the objective. I think you know, the intent behind a viral video is what we're talking about here, because it doesn't matter if somebody wins the X Factor and she's surprising and her voice sounds big and it gets 1 billion views. It's, can you take your new creamy peanut butter and get 1 billion views? That's much harder, obviously. And I don't know if the 100,000 views are because it features, you know, a popular baseball star and you know, whatever, the return of MC Hammer and a bunch of sort of minor celebrities in the Valley. But I don't know if that's going to get Ed Lee elected or get him hated or more people will like him or dislike him. That's why that one to me falls somewhere in the cracks between viral and not viral, in that even if it had 100 million views, I don't know that that would get Ed Lee elected. And it's a lot harder when you're actually trying to do KPI, as we were talking about them, but some measure of, say, will this sell more pallets or more boxes or whatever of what I'm trying to do? It's a lot harder when you come to the party to be funny and great and entertaining and get 1 million people to listen to you and sell them something at the end of the day.
But see, I think this video is a real interesting kind of case study because it speaks to exactly that thing of, I think the 100,000 is worth way more than that, because not to get too much into the minutia of San Francisco politics, but Ed Lee is under fire for potential voter fraud. So for at least one day, if not a few days, the media is now talking about something other than voter fraud. And that could get him elected. And so it's maybe not reaching like that mass audience of viewers, but it goes back to the goal. Get people focused on something positive, and that video did it. Now, that might not have been the reason for doing it, but yeah.
It goes back to the creative point you made at the beginning, though, Craig, that creative is 100% the driving force behind success. Because you can get 100,000 people to see that thing, and if it made them hate him, or it made them not want to vote for him, then it was the opposite of successful. So the view metric can never be the success metric. The creative has to drive the actual story that you're trying to drive home.
So what is the dominant within your organization, Walter and Gregor? Is it the metric, or is it the objective and the realization of whether or not you achieved your objective, would you say?
I mean, I would say at Clorox Company, they use the term BDA, which is an acronym for brand driver analysis, which is after it's done, it's like, did it work? It's like a sophisticated ROI. And they can do that on PR now, and they can't do it on social yet. I think in the case, say, of that Ed Lee video, I watched it and had a couple reactions watching it, because I know that one of the negative perceptions of Ed Lee is that he's too much in the pocket of rich businessmen in the South Bay. And they have Marissa walking around in there, who's the poster child for a young billionaire, and so on. And all these people are sort of like, I like him, and by the way, I'm the head of Twitter, and I'm Biz Stone, and you just gave me a free rent in San Francisco. So, right, a tax break. So like, in some ways, it underscores some negative perceptions. To people who already like him, they're probably like, whoa, Ed Lee's cool. He's not just some old administrator. He's a guy who's got young friends who are rich. So I think it could break both ways. I would say, as far as if that were a Clorox video, I think there are very rigorous analytical minds that would set out to say, does this strategy match the creative, and what is the output where we will know when we've reached success? And it would be tricky to know, because then they would want to poll those people who saw it and get their feelings about it, which I guess we'll find out in 2 weeks. If it
Are those rigorous minds a benefit or a liability, or both?
Well, I mean, here's another thing another way to pull back is to look at like the intention of each video. Here's what we can say. For the kind of videos that are really about cultural phenomenons and things like that, that can eat away of the share of the kind of, branded communication that all companies do, all consumer-facing companies do, that have no specific objective besides getting out there, and building brand. Because that's the black box, which, of course we can create 1 million different metrics around a traditional campaign that's supposed to do that, that's sort of entertainment focused, but really isn't that good, versus an Ed Lee video, which, without any seeding, those 100,000 views indicated true creative viability. And that to me is what I mean, this is like
Brian Wilson's just really popular.
What's that?
Or Brian Wilson's just incredibly popular in the city of San Francisco.
Well, still, but it made it creatively viable.
Yeah, Brian Wilson in giant pants is a reason to watch the video.
Well, exactly. But I mean, I feel like, isn't that, even just seeing that kind of response from actually the results, like way more valuable than just putting something out there, even if you focus grouped it to death, because we got to move away from this, okay, dollars in to impressions out. You know what I mean? Because, yeah, it's guaranteed, okay? It's linear from how much you can get. It's about, so like, how do you infuse creative viability as a way to, as you're putting out things into the market, to still be learning from them as they're doing it. And I think, the Ed Lee's example, if that were somehow a branded campaign, you'd look at that and say, okay, super creatively viable, let's pour more seeding money into it, let's pour more distribution into it, let's scale this in the organization because something's working, as opposed to doing all postmortems.
Yes, it's just worth noting, I bet you that did not start, you can answer this, I bet that didn't start with a creative brief, with a strategy and an objective. It probably started more like, Brian's in, and so is, MC Hammer. Let's shoot it. And I think it's somewhere in between an intentional one and a kind of accidental success. I think one that came to mind is Sarah Silverman doing The Great Schlep. Like, I don't know if that helped or hurt Obama's re-election campaign, but it was one that was entertaining comedians doing a funny thing. That got tons of views. Who's to say what the political output of that was?
Yeah, politics are hard, because I think in politics you don't really do like brand lift, dynamic logic studies and stuff like that. But I think your point at Clorox is that if that had been a Clorox campaign or for anything that you guys do, you are doing brand lift studies and purchase intent studies and brand awareness and brand affinity. So back to your question, Craig, how do we measure success? That's how we measure success. Every brand campaign is somehow tied to a brand metric. Not necessarily sales yet, because it's too hard to track a view of an AskCam video to a sale of a Levi's pants. Maybe you guys can do that. We can't. But we're tracking purchase intent and brand lift and brand affinity, and those metrics either tell you it worked or it didn't work, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you can get people to engage with a piece of content, but it doesn't help the brand.
And sticking with the distribution side of things, I was wondering, what would you guys, Mitchell and Dan specifically, what should customers, a prospective buyer of distributed video, look for in a vendor like yourselves? What questions should they ask for maximum transparency and value? Because I think it being somewhat of a new technology-driven platform or option, I don't think there's a lot of knowledge and transparency around that option. So what can the consumer market do to be better educated?
Well, I encourage all of our clients to demand transparency. Because frankly, in online video in general, I'm sure Dan would agree with it, there's not nearly enough of that. I think that transparency, metrics that are understandable and achievable from the beginning should be a requirement. And I think that the distribution strategy as a whole needs to be laid out, and it should be a very cooperative effort, because there's 50 different ways to have success, and there's 50 different ways you can define success. You've heard Walter and Gregor talk a little bit about what's successful for them. Some of our clients, if we have an entertainment client, all they care about is a big opening weekend, or their Nielsen ratings for the first day that the show comes on. They're very, very different, and so that really informs our strategy, and we will approach these campaigns in diametrically opposite ways sometimes.
Another question for the room, actually, before I answer that one. Does anybody in this room buy social video or buy brand content distribution? So this is very theoretical then. But the way that we think about it, definitely transparency. Transparency doesn't always have to mean like reporting transparency. Transparency can also mean like integrity and honesty. And I think it's also a question for us around choice versus interruption. I think that's the key driver for us. If you're buying distribution for brand content, the key thing is about choice. It's got to be about, I'm choosing to watch this thing, as opposed to interrupting a user with a pre-roll or interrupting with an interruptive ad somewhere. I think the other piece, it's a little bit more intangible, and it's a lot harder to put your finger on, is that if you're a brand, like either Levi's or Clorox, and you're creating this piece of content that's beyond a traditional TV ad, and you are like personally and emotionally invested in it. The creative director is personally invested in it. Everybody involved is just telling their parents about it and telling their friends and their wives and their kids like about this project they're working on, which you would never do with a traditional ad. I think you need to demand that the media company or the technology company has that same level of personal and emotional appreciation for the creative content itself. And that's very intangible, but it's something that's super important if you're talking about trying to map authentic content with authentic distribution.
Yeah. I would just say one thing about that. I think, the open secret of Toyota that was studied to death about how they make great cars, and it was basically, after 50 years of studying them, everybody worked really hard was sort of the term that they came to. I think there's actually a word for it in Japanese, I can't recall, but I think there have been projects that we've made videos where everyone, the old aphorism on the set is like, if the crew laughs, then you're doomed, where everybody loved it and thought it's going to be great, and it doesn't take off, and nobody can sort of figure out why. And we decide to put a huge amount of money behind it because everyone believes in it, and it still doesn't take off. And then we just did one recently where it took off wildly. We put about $10,000 behind it, which is kind of nothing, and it took off like into the millions, and everyone's like scratching their heads as to why. I do think there is just a note of humility I would strike, that there is definitely a do your best practices, try and get all the things you're supposed to get, do all the lead and seed you can do with the most sophisticated possible everything. And maybe you don't like the word luck for it, but there's certainly something else, which is maybe a fingers crossed moment, which some things just seem to take off and others don't, and who knows why.
There's an element of luck in every creative thing. I was an art director for years. There's just a thing that happens sometimes, and there's a thing that doesn't happen other times, and that's an intangible that's a key part of this process no matter what. And if you're going to shoot for the stars, then obviously you can hire the best creative team. You could get the team that writes Modern Family to do something hilarious. They do it every week, but this time it just doesn't work out. Sometimes the free agent you get from another team doesn't play well on your team in this offense. Who knows?
Right.
So I tend to agree. And in my business, we tend to minimize that because, as Walter indicated, it's much more about paid media and delivering quantifiable ROI than necessarily viral. And I'd say that's 7 out of 8 of our clients. Some clients come to us and they want a big viral hit, and again, that's a different strategy for us.
And I think from that, you want a role of someone who is sober enough, who is outside of your campaign to really kind of give you some indication going into it what they think is going to come out of it. Because every client says they want disruptive, amazing, blah, 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 but it's, again, it's great to work with experts like the guys on both of my sides and say, you know what, we know this market. We've seen about 500 films. We kind of know what's happening right now. And, I think we need to, like, manage our expectations around here. Or, because I feel like at the end of the day, like, a lot of companies seem to do the same thing. They all have their secret sauce. They all have their algorithms. They all have the things that they're willing to share and things they're not willing to share. Things that I look for is really good strategy, because it shows to me that, they've really thought about this space and know how to take advantage of this space for what makes it unique. And those are things that you want to hear as a client up front and while it's happening. You don't want to hear excuses. You want to hear explanations, and you want to hear sort of, weather reports, if you will.
I'll tell you what.
Do you guys do that? Do you guys weigh in and say, based on what I'm seeing in the marketplace right now, this video has, great chance of going viral or no chance of going viral? Are you open and honest with your clients?
Very honest. And I'll tell you what, I had my humility moment about 4 years ago, because I really thought, as a former creative and having done hundreds of these campaigns, I could tell you what was going to go viral or not. I don't have any idea. And I just start the conversation with that. We do have best practices. We do have the best strategy. We do hundreds of campaigns every year, probably more than or as many as anybody else in the industry. We really don't always know. And there's no way to actually know. But there are definitely indicators. I could say to Walter, this thing, I think it's too long. Or, in my experience, it's too slow. I don't have a smock. I can't tell you like a doctor can tell you. I can't diagnose it for you. But these are the best indicators we have.
A lot of times we'll try to get a judge on what's the client's definition of viral, because then that's going to judge how much we have to meter them back. Are we speaking on the same language of there is no such thing as viral, like there is no spoon? Or is it something where like they totally believe that it's possible to do the right equation to do it, in which case you got to totally measure them back. So the conversation depends on speaking the same language.
Yeah, I've had
I
that
just
conversation.
wondered if we had any questions, because we have about 5 minutes left. So do you guys, do we have any questions? Or do you guys want to keep going, or are you ready for one of my questions?
We're ready either
You're
way.
in charge. You tell us.
Oh, okay. So, well, a couple of minutes ago, you guys were talking about, when the viral thing doesn't hit, and yet, clients have launch strategies and all this kind of stuff that are going to go on whether or not this video is successful. So, how do you make your way around that? Because you still have to have the message get out there. And I mean, obviously, paid media is always a good backup strategy. But how do you kind of I don't know, what's your insurance policy when things do not take off the way you need them to in the time frame you need them to take off in?
We had a client come to us this month with a video with a celebrity in it, and they said, I only want to spend X with you, Mitchell, because this is a viral monster. And this was the moment of being honest, Walter, where I said, you know what? You don't know that for sure. You can't. It looks funny to me, but what do I know? I'm a white guy from Connecticut. So yeah, you say to that client, you should. It's our job, I feel, to be honest with them and say, backup strategy A, B, or C. There are lots of different things. You could have an outreach and seeding strategy. You can hire Dan. You could hire me to back it up. You could hire a PR firm. There's all kinds of things you can do as backup. But the main thing is, I think, if you have somebody that's sure that they have a hit, there's obviously an issue.
Yeah, there's kind of an underlying thing I think you're saying there, which is if your strategy is dependent on a viral video, you have a bad strategy.
That's right.
I know, it's kind of funny for you guys to be in the business of, on the one hand, obviously wanting these things to work and say, well, if we don't do the job that well, it's not even doing the job. It's so it's so hard to get at what success is. But if it doesn't work out, we got to have all these other things and ready to go or what have you to make sure that you still sell the product.
Yeah, but I think it depends on your program too. I think, I really believe a company that shows up 12 times a year in a very relevant way is bigger than a company that shows up twice a year, even if the one that they're doing twice a year is spending hundreds of millions and more dollars on media. I think at the end of the day, all this pressure comes from the fact that we're really applying basically the same way we produce assets onto a completely different medium. And I feel like a lot of times it's not taking advantage of the medium. If you could kind of be humble and say, we don't know if everything's going to work, but we want to be constantly learning from every single product and execution so that we can gear towards getting it more to work towards our audience, you're going to get more out of it, I think. I feel like that pressure comes from a need to spend more and more money because you spent so much money on the creative, you spent so much money on the process, you could produce one asset. That I feel like is really concentrating a lot of the risk.
Yeah, I will just say, I have the opportunity to work on a bunch of brands at Clorox Company, and it's usually on the small brands that are in decline where they say, it's like the Bad News Bears thing, like we're going to close out this brand unless we can do something, and that's where something interesting usually happens. And I do think in the low stakes world, you sometimes get the biggest surprises and have the most fun. Usually in the bigger brands where they're spending more money and they're sure of what they're going to do, it's more like when you've had 2 hit movies with Harrison Ford, so they're going to open the next one at $100 million weekend, and lo and behold, it's a big failure. I think you can have strategies to abrogate that failure where they then do international distribution and figure out a way to put it into direct TV for 100 years. But in general, if Hollywood has taught us anything in this life, it's that nobody knows what they're talking about, right? You could take the same stars and the same formula, the same vehicle, the same franchise. You have the first one's a hit, the second one's a flop, the third one's a hit. Nobody really has it dialed in. So I do think, to Walter's point, it's kind of nice to have a few opportunities to fail. Because as I was also observing downstairs, the airport business books are all about how failure is good, but nobody actually wants to have a failure. But failure is kind of good because you learn lessons and you can take away learning. I think it's nice to have a lot of little failures and figure your way instead of putting all your money down on Red 23 and hope for the best, because usually that's not a great strategy in life.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. I think they're ready for cocktails. I'm sure you guys are too. I also wanted to mention that the Ed Lee video is now at like 205,000. So
it's because of this talk.
And I want to listen to. I want to actually watch it with the sound on because I'm like, this looks really cool. But anyway. Well, thanks a lot to our panelists. So let's give them a round of applause. And.